Hi students, this is Ms. Temple, and today we are going to review how to do a close reading. There are 5 easy steps how to do a close reading. Step number 1, you're going to read the text silently and then read aloud. Step number 2, you're going to read and annotate, which means mark up the text. First part of annotation, you're going to circle unknown words and look up their definitions or meanings. The second part, you're going to highlight interesting language, literary devices, or significant words. Step number 3, you're going to do with a partner. With your partner, you're going to read and discuss the main idea, theme, and context in which the text was written. And then you're going to label these within the text. Step number 4, also with your partner, you're going to write in each side of the margins of the text. On the left side, you're going to summarize each paragraph or stanza. And on the right side, you're going to write down any questions that you have about the text. And if you don't have any, you're going to come up with text-dependent questions on your own. And finally, step number 5, you're going to answer the complex question that I have provided you with, and you're going to underline your evidence in the text as you find it. So let's start with step number 1. First part is to read the text silently, and then you're going to read it aloud. So let's take a look at the text. I've chosen an excerpt from Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, which was delivered on August 28, 1963 at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. I trust that you have all read this silently to begin with, so let's read it aloud. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. Okay, now that we have read the text aloud, we can check these 2 items off of our step 1 list and move on to step 2. In step 2, we are going to read the text again while annotating. The first part of step 2, we're going to circle unknown words and look up their meanings. So let's take a look at the text again. Let's take this one stanza at a time. Let's look at the first stanza. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. After doing this activity in class, I've taken note of some of the words that we've had questions about, and I'm going to use those words that were maybe unknown or not quite understood by the students and apply those today. So the first word that everyone had an issue with was creed. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and circle creed. Now I'm going to take my dictionary and look up the definition, and I found that creed is, or a creed, is a statement of belief, principles, or opinions. Okay, so it's a formal statement. Another word in the stanza that was not well known was self-evident. So after looking up the definition, I know that self-evident means requiring no proof or explanation. Let's take a look at the second stanza now. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. Okay, a word that a few of us were having issues with was former. It's a word that we hear a lot, but you might not know exactly what it means. So after looking up the definition, I know that former means in the past. So someone that was a slave owner in the past or a slave in the past. Let's look at stanza number 3. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering in the heat of injustice, sweltering in the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom. There's a couple words in here that we need to look up. The first one is sweltering. It's important because it's repeated a couple times, but it's also important because we're not exactly sure what it means. So after looking up sweltering, it means an oppressive heat, very hot. Okay, so I know what hot means, but what about oppressive? If you look on the next line down, we see the word oppression. Okay, oppression and oppressive come from the same root word. So let's find out what oppression means. After looking up the definition, I know that oppression is a cruel exercise of power. So someone that is having or taking advantage of the power that is given to them. And finally, let's look at oasis. This is another one that we were having trouble with in class. An oasis is a fertile green spot in a desert. Okay, so there's a lot of mentioning of words that have to do with heat. We've got sweltering. We have the word heat a couple times. So an oasis would be a foil to that, something that means the opposite of that heat. Okay, and then let's look at the fourth stanza. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. That's 4 and 5. And in class, we all understood all of those words. So now we can check, read the text and begin annotating, and we can check off, circle unknown words and look at their meanings. So now we're going to highlight interesting language, literary devices, and significant words. So what do these things mean? Interesting language, anything that pops out at you as interesting. Literary devices, things like metaphors, symbols, similes, things like that the author uses. Fancy language. And finally, significant words. Words that are maybe repeated more than once, capitalized, italicized. So let's look at the text again. Let's look at the first stanza. The first thing that I'm going to highlight is I have a dream. I'm going to highlight this because it's the title of the excerpt or the speech. Next, I would like to highlight the word nation. I'm going to highlight this because I know that it is repeated in the text again, and I also think it's interesting that he chose nation instead of just listing the country. And finally, in this stanza, I'm going to highlight, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I'm going to highlight this because it has quotation marks around it. Now, you might know that if something has quotation marks around it, it means that it is being cited from something else, which means that Martin Luther King took this quote from either another speech or another written document and used it in his own. So we're going to find out where that came from. Let's take a look at the second stanza. I've also decided to highlight I have a dream because it's repeated again. That should be special for some reason since he keeps repeating it so often. I'm also going to highlight Georgia. I'm going to highlight it because it's a proper noun and it's capitalized in the middle of the sentence, and I think it's interesting that he chose to pick a specific state to talk about. And finally, I'm going to highlight Table of Brotherhood. Now I'm going to highlight this because it's a literary device. It's a symbol that Martin Luther King is using for friendship. He doesn't really want everyone to sit down physically at a table together as brothers. He's using the Table of Brotherhood as a symbol for friendship or everyone getting along, camaraderie. In the third stanza, again, I'm going to highlight I have a dream because it's repeated. And I'm also going to highlight Mississippi because it's a proper noun, just like Georgia, and he's choosing to use that for some reason instead of just listing any other state. I'm also going to highlight sweltering because he uses it twice, and also because I think it's a really interesting word. It's better than just saying really hot or heat. It also adds to the symbol of heat and the metaphor that he keeps using. Okay, I'm going to highlight heat because it goes with sweltering. And I'm going to highlight an oasis of freedom and justice. This is a literary element. It makes me think of a desert, and there is this wonderful paradise that pops up in the middle of the desert. He's really using some imagery here and some interesting metaphors for heat and this cool oasis that you come across, which is his dream. So I think that's really interesting, and I'm going to highlight that. Stanza 4, I'm going to highlight I have a dream because it's repeated, and I'm going to highlight will not be judged by the color of their skin. I'm going to highlight this because this is the first time in the entire speech that he has mentioned the color of the skin being the root issue for the inequality, and I think that's very important. And then finally, I'm going to highlight I have a dream today. I'm going to highlight this again because it's repeated, but also because it kind of wraps up everything that was said. Dream is italicized, and he also adds today, creating some kind of urgency over the receiver of the speech, saying that things need to change now. Okay, so I can go ahead and check this off of my step 2, highlighting, and we're ready to move on to step 3. This we are going to do with a partner. First, we are going to read and discuss the main idea, theme, and the context, and then we're going to label these as we find them within the text. So let's first find the main idea. Just to make it easy, let's just pick one stanza or one sentence that we feel kind of sums up and is the main topic, the main idea of this speech or this excerpt of the speech. I'm going to go ahead and choose stanza 4, and I'm going to go ahead and mark that with MI for main idea. I think that the most probably appropriate main idea for this speech is stanza 4. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, because this is the most direct stanza out of all of them. Martin Luther King really just comes out and says what he wants in this one, instead of using some of the fancy, more interesting language. This one is the most direct and easy to understand for the receiver of the speech or the reader. Now I'm going to look at the theme. Now, if you remember when we reviewed in class, that theme is almost like a moral or a lesson that the author is intending the reader to take away. So I think the theme of this speech is equality and equal rights for all people. So I'm going to just make a few marks with my little T of things that I think kind of add to that theme or support that theme through the speech. So the first thing that I'm going to write a T next to is we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And I'm going to do that because all men are created equal. It says right there, equal, which is the same as equality. I'm also going to do that next to table of brotherhood because there's that symbol for friendship, equality, camaraderie that we talked about earlier. And finally, I'm going to put a little T next to not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Because, again, Martin Luther King just spells it out for us right here, exactly what he wants, exactly what the problem is, and what the solution should be. And finally, I'm going to put a C next to something that helps me understand the context in which this was given, the speech was given. So part of the context is which is going to help me find out when this was given, is the little line up top where it talks about the date and the setting in which the speech was delivered. So that helps me understand where this was happening, what was going on when this was happening. We know it was the Lincoln Memorial, so it must have been some kind of rally or march or some kind of public affair in which this was given. Okay, so we can go ahead and check these things off our list for step 3. Now we're going